Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Black Literature, Black History. This is Jason Williams. There's a few more gems that I would like to expand on in the story, The Blues I'm Playing by Langston Hughes in the book called The Ways of White Folks. And what I want to point out here is that the book is called The Ways of White Folks. And in The Blues I'm Playing, Langston Hughes addresses their ways and their views towards art and what they do to music once they get involved. Now I want to start out by reading a passage to you because Langston Hughes is direct and he doesn't sugarcoat anything, and he's addressing real issues in these stories. And as for the cultured Negroes who are always saying art would break down color lines, art could save the race and prevent lynchings. Bunk, said Osceola. My ma and pa were both artists when it came to making music, and the white folks ran them out of town for being dressed up in Alabama. And look at the Jews. Every other artist in the world's a Jew, and still folks hate them. So Langston Hughes is a realist. He is an artist. He's a poet, he's a storyteller, he loves jazz, he loves the blues. However, he does not believe for one moment that art can change the ways of white folks. He does not believe like Bob Marley used to believe, and I like Bob Marley, but like Bob Marley used to believe that music and art and things of that nature will change the situation of black folks and the relations between whites and blacks. Now, many artists believe that, and a lot of people that make music really believe that because they think that when they're making music and they're out there partying and they're having a ball, white and black people do get along and have fun with each other, out there drinking and whatever. However, that goes back to what I wanted to talk about with the music. They're not interested in any aspect of your life except for partying, sex, and drugs. And sex and drugs accompanies art a lot, and that does not break down what they believe about you. It's about fun. In the Harlem Renaissance or the Harlem Invasion, the white folks came down to the cabarets and they sat in bars and had fun and rubbed elbows with Negroes and slummed. But at the end of the night, they either went home with some black woman or black man and in the night, in the dark, but at the end of the day, they went back to their homes outside of the Negro culture. All they were interested in were the speakeasies, cabarets, dancing, sex, drugs, drinking. But as far as addressing the real problem, as far as the conditions that black people were living in, the jobs that black people needed, the education that black people needed, equality and getting rid of Jim Crow, they weren't interested in that, and they still aren't. Now, how does that relate to hip-hop? Well, I said, back in the day, hip-hop artists were supported by black people, the consumers were black people, and the music spoke to black people. Once the consumers became young suburban white kids, black people started selling out their music because in order to become platinum or in order to go platinum, you wanted to just sell as many records as you could. And now when we look at the music, we see sex and we see drugs and violence. But really, we see a lot of sex because that is all they're interested in the black culture. They are not interested in what we still need: jobs. We need better living conditions, and we're still seeking some sort of equality or equal treatment. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to sit there and we just want to integrate and rub elbows with white people all the time, and that'd be fine, but that's not what we want. We want to live quality life. And back in the day, when they used to rap about that and black pride, white people weren't interested. But once they got into the sex, the drugs, and the violence, then they started getting interested. And what did I talk about? Discourse. They establish the discourse, they circulate the discourse, they ratify it, and then it becomes truth. And you got a lot of people right now talking about rap music and this pop rap music, classifying it as hip hop, and it's not. And it's not. So back then, he's talking about the same issues that are going on right now, and they just put a new face on it. But it's the same thing, and we keep getting manipulated over and over by the money. In this book, Osceola Jones, she had a business going on. She had a business where she was playing for the church. She had students, pupils, and she used to go around to the bars and the cabarets and play the soul music there. Now, Miss Ellsworth came along with all of her money, and there's two ways to look at this. One way rubbed me the wrong way when she said, "I'll pay for everything. You don't have to do any of that," because Miss Ellsworth didn't think she should be doing that. She didn't like her going to the speakeasies and playing, and she didn't want her to have pupils. She didn't want her to have that man, his name was Pete, which was Osceola's boyfriend and future husband, around. Miss Ellsworth wanted to control Osceola. And eventually, in some sort, she did, because when I was reading the story and Osceola finally agreed to take Miss Ellsworth's money, she stopped having pupils, and she stopped going to the church very often. And she actually stopped everything for a while because she actually traveled with Miss Ellsworth. Now, the other way I like to look at this is, during this story, the Great Depression hit, so it was a good thing that she did go with Miss Ellsworth, because when the Great Depression hit, black people couldn't really afford anything extra, so Osceola may have struggled. And it did address that the Great Depression did not affect Miss Ellsworth and those who had a lot of money. Actually, Langston Hughes stated in this story that it was hard for them to lose their money. But those are the few things that we need to look at. And we're looking at the power dynamic in here and the ways of white folks. Miss Ellsworth was the white woman in this. When she met Osceola, and throughout this entire story, she never asked Osceola what she wanted. She always had suggestions, which were more like demands, and Osceola would stand her ground on some of them and say, "No, no, no, yes, I'm not going to do this." But there was no questions about, what would you like to do? What would you want to do? They take the money. I got the money. I'm paying for you to do things. You should do what I tell you to do because I paid for it. It's kind of like slavery. And then when Osceola didn't follow the rules, Miss Ellsworth said, "Is this what I paid for?" And Osceola said, "No, this is mine." And then she went off and played the soul music. But those are the things that I want you to think about when you're reading these stories. Think about the dynamic, the ways of white folks. And Langston Hughes, keep it real. He says, art for art's sake is good. Art, writing stories, playing instruments, making artwork, but don't think for one moment that this art is going to change the world and change the ways of white folks, because it doesn't. And what do we have today? We always asking these opinions and holding these opinions real high of these celebrities. And these celebrities are being paid by Miss Ellsworth. And many of them don't stand their ground, and they're artists. And Malcolm X addressed that in one interview that he had, and if I find it, I'm going to put it on the video and we'll talk about it. Where they were talking about Harry Belafonte, Sidney Poitier, and a whole bunch of celebrities got together, and Dick Gregory, and gave their opinion about integration, and Malcolm X was like, these are celebrities. These aren't politicians. These aren't people who set the ground rules. These are celebrities. And then he pointed out that most of them were married to white women, and they had an agenda where they wanted to integrate, where Malcolm X was strongly against that. So, and that's, not the interracial part, but that's what Langston Hughes is kind of saying here. Like, art is not going to change the ways of white folks. Bob Marley thought that his music was going to change the world. That's not what changes the world. It helps. It helps because it can get you together. And that's addressed in Infants of the Spring by Wallace Thurman. He talks about all of these race problems that we have in the United States, and then you walk by a party where there's liquor, music, and men and women, and it looks like everybody is just integrated and having a great time. But that is only for entertainment. They're not interested in the house that you live in, the conditions that you live in, the neighborhood problems, education, your kids and your family. They're not interested in that. And you need to keep that in mind when you're in situations where you're thinking about, maybe taking somebody's money or being funded by someone, and then changing up what it is. And I got when I was in the barber shop in Ohio, when I used to live in Ohio, there was a rapper, and his name was, he called himself Smurf. And he had this music, and it was, he was rapper making music, and it was bragging about this, and bragging about money, and bragging about all the women that he could get, and all of that. And he looked at everybody, he was playing the music, and he noticed that no one was interested. And that's the thing, the majority of, I'm not going to say the majority, but many black folks are not interested in this mainstream hip hop that's out here. That's a misconception. Just because there's black faces and minstrels playing this music and buck dancing and skipping around and talking about all this stuff, that music is targeting the white audience. And if you look at them concerts that they like to show every now and then, and you see all those fist pumping, then there's a whole bunch of white hands and white arms, because a lot of black folks can't afford the prices that it costs to get into those concerts. And therefore, these artists, they don't sing towards black folks because black folks can't pay the price that it costs to go to these concerts. And many of those concerts aren't worth the ticket that it costs to go to those concerts. However, at the barbershop, he noticed that no one was really interested that much in his music. And then he said, well, this is what my agent has me playing. Somebody was sponsoring him. And he was like, this is the kind of music that he wants me to come out with. He was like, however, I got my own music that I make that he doesn't have anything to do with. And he was like, I'll let you guys listen to that. You want to hear some of my music that I make on my own time? And he played that. And that was some real hip hop. That was talking to us. And a couple people in that barbershop said, I'll buy some of that music. And he made some money right there with his own music. Not with what the agent was telling him, not with the sex and the talking about how many women he got and how much cars and gold and all of that. But when he told us, look, this is my other music that he don't want me to come out with, but I'm holding it for when I want to come out and do my own thing. That's when he sold his music. That's what black people want to listen to. Unfortunately, black people are only 13% of the population. And out of that 13% of the population, many black people are not into hip hop. That's just the way it is. Many black people aren't into it. And especially the stuff that they're talking about now. But so if you come out in hip hop and you talking about black issues and the black community and being real with the origin of hip hop, you probably won't go all the way platinum. Few do. Some do, but the majority don't. So they sell out, and then the sex, and you even see some of the real rappers go that route and come out with some, consistently good stuff, and then all of a sudden it's like, what is this that you're coming out with? And they're just trying to sell records. But so the same thing, Langston Hughes was talking about the music and art back then. Have your art, have your parties, but don't, be real about it and know that it's not going to be art that changes the ways of white folks. Okay? All right, this is Jason, Black Literature, Black History, and have a nice evening.
Little sucker,
you talking all that jazz.
It's time to stand together in a unity, cause if not, then we're soon to be self-destroyed, unemployed. The rap race will be lost without a trace or a clue, but what to do is stop the violence and kick the science down the road that we call eternity, where knowledge is formed and you learn to be self-sufficient, independent. To teach to each is what rap intended, but society wants to invade, so do not walk this path.
And one more thing, remember the next story that we're going to go over is called Father and Son, which is a story about a double lynching that occurred in Georgia. So that's the next story that we're going to go over. It's the longest story in the book, so we're probably going to have a couple episodes on that. Thank you and have a nice evening.